My name's Josh Butler, and I'd love to give you an overview of my new book, God is on Your Side, How Jesus is for You When Everything Seems Against You, in case it might be a resource for you or your ministry. Well, the introduction asks the question, is God for me? It can be easy to answer yes when things are going well, but harder when life takes a turn for the worse. It was harder for me to believe that God was really on my side when our daughter, 5 years old, was in the hospital and months with specialists, and we were worried that we'd lost her forever. Or when I first faced suicidal thoughts after going through one of the darkest seasons of my life. Hallmark of the book, God is on Your Side, is I share a lot of vulnerable stories like this from my own life to try and open up space for the reader to connect points in their life where they have not necessarily felt like God was on their side or for them. Okay, well, where do we go with that pain, those places in our lives? Well, this book is focused on the Gospel of John, one of my favorite Gospels. I just love going to the Gospel of John. And what we find there right out of the gate is a God who is more on our side than we could ever dare dream. So right in the introduction to John, we see that God is the creator who has entered onto our side of creation as the Word made flesh to be in it with us. We see that he is also the innocent one who steps onto our side as the guilty, as the lamb once slain at the cross, fighting for us to be with us forever. We also see that he is the ladder connecting heaven and earth, bringing his side of heaven, God's side of heaven, onto our side of earth, in us and through us for our good and the good of our world. So right out of the gate, John's introduction, we see that God is in it with us, fighting for us, wants to work in us and through us for our good. Okay, well then chapter 1 is called Set the GPS when you don't know where you're going. And here I focus on the wedding at Cana, Jesus' first sign, his miracle, where he famously turns water to wine. Now, what's the point of that? We could be going, man, cool party trick, Jesus. That shows your power back then. But does it show us something more? Well, yes, it's actually giving us a picture, a foretaste of God's kingdom, what Jesus' ministry has come to accomplish, a future that we can set our GPS towards. So, part of the trick for seeing this too is recognizing the Old Testament backdrop to this miracle, right? So in the Old Testament, the prophets like Joel and Amos said that when the Messiah came, he would bring such an abundance that the mountains would drip with wine, the hills and rivers would run with wine because of the great abundance that would arise when God came to redeem and restore his people. Jesus is saying, that's what I've come to do. I've come to bring my people back to God. And Isaiah said that season, that what that would bring would be like a wedding banquet for all the people to feast when God was reunited in union with his people. Well, that points to something here that's important in this book, and God is on Your Side, is every chapter highlights an Old Testament backdrop that helps the scene in John's gospel pop and make sense at a whole other level. You can read it first glance on its own, it's really powerful, but when you get the Old Testament backdrop, it's like it pops in Technicolor. Okay, another feature of the book is I explore each of the signs in John's gospel as a sign of the gospel, as a sign of what Jesus has come to accomplish through his death and resurrection. So for example, in this first one, the wedding at Cana, we see that there's ceremonial water that Israel used to wash themselves. In the Old Testament, that's part of the story in the wedding at Cana. But now, Jesus turns that water to wine. The point being, you used to get washed with water. Now you get washed with wine. The wine of Jesus' blood shed to atone for our sin and reconcile us to God. And so at the climax of this sign, the master of the banquet, he tastes the wine and goes, oh my gosh, you've saved the best for last. This is better than anything that's come before. And that's a picture of the gospel where God the Father, like the master of the banquet, he tastes, so to speak, of the sacrificial love of the Son and says, oh my gosh, this is better than all the sacrifices, all the things from before to purify, to atone, to deal with sin. Now, the Father delights in the sacrificial love of his Son poured out for his bride and celebrates this wedding, this union at the consummation of history where God and his people are united forever. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is called Bring Down the House When Change is Painful. And it looks at Jesus as saying, tear down this temple, I'll rebuild it again. Looks at the Old Testament backdrop there. And also wrestling with what do you do when change is painful? When you thought that God came to build up your life, which he did, but you find he first came actually to tear some stuff down. And seeing how even God's confrontation of sin and the junk in our life is because he's for us and ultimately working against those things that are working against us to rebuild us up for our good. And then chapter 3, become the beloved when you don't feel wanted. looks at Jesus' famous encounter with the Samaritan woman at the well as a picture of Christ encountering us for union with us as his church. Yes, it's this powerful story of Jesus' one-on-one encounter with this woman, but I explore how John uses details to depict this as a picture of Christ encountering his church. For example, the well is a famous Old Testament symbol of the place where the groom met his bride. Whether we're talking about Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Rachel, Moses and Zipporah, there's a picture here that we are getting in John's gospel of Christ encountering us like the Samaritan woman, the church, part Jew, part Gentile, brought into his kingdom to be united with us forever. Okay, well, that's the first section. In the next video, I'll go into a little more from the second section of the book.